It started with small things, things I told myself didn't matter. A missed call here, a late-night text there. She would smile at me over dinner, her eyes warm and familiar, but something felt off. It wasn't the kind of unease that screams betrayal. It was quieter, like the faint creak of floorboards in an old house you've lived in for years. You notice it, but you convince yourself it's just part of the structure. Her name is Elena, and we've been married for 8 years. 8 years of laughter, arguments, shared dreams, and quiet moments on the couch watching movies neither of us particularly liked but tolerated because we were together. We weren't perfect. We argued about finances, chores, and how often to visit our families. But we always found our way back to each other. Or so I thought. The first crack appeared during one of those mundane evenings when life feels more like a routine than a journey. I had asked her about her day, a question as ordinary as breathing, and she hesitated before answering. "It was fine," she said finally, avoiding my gaze as she stirred her tea. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she was rehearsing lines instead of speaking from the heart. I let it go then, chalking it up to stress or fatigue. But the cracks kept spreading. There were nights when she claimed to be working late, yet her car sat untouched in the driveway. Phone calls went unanswered, texts remained unread for hours, and once, I caught her hastily closing her laptop when I walked into the room. When I asked what she was doing, she laughed it off, saying she'd been shopping online. Still, I didn't confront her. Not really. Deep down, I think I knew something was wrong, but I was afraid of what I might find. Fear can make cowards out of even the strongest people, and I was no exception. Instead, I buried myself in work, hoping that if I ignored the signs long enough, they would disappear on their own. But they didn't. One evening, after weeks of simmering tension, we had our first real fight. It began innocently enough, with a discussion about weekend plans, but quickly escalated into something far uglier. She accused me of being distant, of not paying attention to her needs. And maybe she was right. Maybe I had been neglecting her without realizing it. But instead of apologizing, I lashed out, accusing her of secrecy and dishonesty. "You're hiding something," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "Don't deny it." She froze, her face pale, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Then anger flashed in her eyes, sharp and sudden. "Maybe I am," she snapped back, "and maybe you should ask yourself why." We stood there, glaring at each other, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved pain. Neither of us slept that night. The next morning, still raw from the argument, we agreed to see a family counselor. It wasn't an easy decision. Neither of us wanted to admit defeat, but we both knew something had to change. Little did I know, those sessions would unravel secrets darker than anything I could have imagined. The counselor's office was warm, almost too warm, with soft lighting and the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. It felt like stepping into someone else's life, a life where problems could be solved neatly, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. I didn't trust it. Elena sat beside me on the couch, her posture stiff, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of everything unsaid between us had pressed down on her shoulders. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand or say something reassuring, but I couldn't. My anger still simmered beneath the surface, hot and unrelenting. Dr. Marlowe, our counselor, greeted us with a calm smile that seemed practiced yet genuine. He was older, with silver hair and glasses perched low on his nose, giving him an air of wisdom I wasn't sure I trusted. "Thank you both for coming," he said, gesturing for us to sit. "Let's start by talking about why you're here today." Neither of us spoke at first. Elena stared at her hands while I focused on the framed diplomas hanging on the wall behind him. Finally, she broke the silence. "We've been struggling lately," she began hesitantly. "Things feel distant between us." I snorted before I could stop myself. Distant? That's one way to put it. Dr. Marlowe raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Instead, he turned to me. "Would you like to share your perspective?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "How do you explain the gnawing suspicion that has taken root in your chest without sounding paranoid?" "I feel like there's more going on than she's telling me," I admitted finally. "She's been secretive, avoiding conversations, disappearing for hours without explanation. And when I ask about it, she shuts me out. Elena flinched at my words, but she didn't deny them. Instead, she glanced at Dr. Marlowe, her expression unreadable. "He's not wrong," she murmured softly. "But it's not just me. We've both been pulling away from each other for a long time." Her admission caught me off guard. Was she right? Had I been so consumed by my own suspicions that I hadn't noticed how much I had changed? Dr. Marlowe nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like there's a lot of unresolved tension between you two. Let's try to unpack that together. Elena, can you tell me what's been weighing on you lately?" For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again as if she were wrestling with her thoughts. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "It's hard to explain," she said slowly. "I've been feeling lost. Like no matter what I do, it's never enough. You work all the time, and when you're home, you're distracted. I feel like I'm invisible sometimes." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Invisible? Is that really how she saw herself? Guilt twisted inside me, sharp and unexpected. I opened my mouth to respond, but Dr. Marlowe held up a hand. "Let's pause here," he said gently. "This is important, but it's also clear that there are deeper issues at play. For now, I want both of you to think about this. What do you need from each other to feel supported and understood?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Neither of us spoke during the drive home. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Elena's words replayed in my mind over and over. Invisible. Could I have been so blind to her pain? Or was this just another layer of deception, a way to deflect blame from whatever secret she was keeping? I wanted to believe her, to give her the benefit of the doubt, but doubt was all I had left. The days following our first counseling session were tense, filled with awkward silences and stolen glances. Elena seemed quieter than usual, retreating into herself as though she were carrying a burden too heavy to share. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the faint hope that things could still be salvaged. Then, one evening, everything changed. I had stayed late at work, trying to distract myself from the storm brewing at home. When I finally returned, the house was dark except for a sliver of light spilling from beneath the study door. Curious, I pushed it open and froze. Elena sat at the desk, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop screen. Her expression was one of guilt and panic as she quickly closed a window on the screen. But not before I saw it. A string of messages, intimate and unmistakably flirtatious, exchanged between her and someone named Liam. My heart sank like a stone dropped into deep water. Betrayal surged through me, hot and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. "What is this?" My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Elena spun around, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, frozen and helpless. Then reality crashed over her, and she scrambled to explain. "It's not what you think," she stammered, standing up so abruptly that the chair scraped against the floor. "Not what I think," I snapped, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. "You're messaging some guy, sending him texts you'd never send to your own husband. How is this not what I think?" She flinched at my tone but didn't back down. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, and her voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't mean for this to happen, I swear. It just started innocently. He was there when you weren't. He listened when I needed someone to talk to." "Innocently?" I repeated, incredulous. "This doesn't look innocent, Elena." "I know," she cried, her composure breaking. "I know it's wrong, okay? But you don't understand how lonely I've been. You're always working, always distracted. I needed someone who cared about me, not just the version of me you wanted to see." Her words cut deeper than any knife ever could. Loneliness. That's what drove her to this? To seek comfort in another man's arms while I sat oblivious, thinking we were fine? But even amidst the pain, anger burned brighter. "So instead of talking to me, you decided to cheat?" I spat, my voice cold and biting. "That's your solution? To throw away 8 years of marriage because you felt neglected?" It wasn't like that, she insisted, tears streaming down her face now. At least he made me feel seen. At least he cared enough to ask how I was doing. Her confession hit me like a freight train. Seen, cared for. Words I should have been saying but wasn't. Yet hearing them come from her lips in defense of another man shattered whatever fragile trust remained between us. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of hurt and accusation, until Elena finally broke the silence. "I'll leave," she whispered, grabbing her coat from the hook near the door. "I can't do this right now." And just like that, she walked out, leaving me alone with the wreckage of our marriage. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages, the casual intimacy, the promises of support and understanding, promises I should have been making. By morning, Elena still hadn't come home. The days that followed Elena's departure felt surreal, like living in a dream where nothing made sense. I wandered through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects, a coffee mug she used every morning, the blanket she draped over the couch, but they no longer felt real. They were remnants of a life I thought I understood but now realized I never truly knew. I tried calling her several times, but she didn't answer. Eventually, I stopped trying. What would I even say? Come back so we can fix this? Or worse, how could you do this to me? Neither question had an answer I was ready to hear. Then, 3 days after she left, I received a text from her. "Elena, we need to talk. Can we meet tomorrow at Dr. Marlowe's office?" Her words were simple, devoid of emotion, and yet they carried the weight of everything unsaid between us. Reluctantly, I agreed. When I arrived at the counselor's office the next afternoon, Elena was already there, sitting stiffly in one of the chairs with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked different somehow. Her hair pulled back into a severe bun, her face pale and drawn. For a moment, I wondered if she'd been crying, but she avoided my gaze, making it impossible to tell. Dr. Marlowe greeted us both warmly, though his usual calm demeanor seemed tinged with caution. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Elena has asked to share something important today. I'll let her take the lead." My stomach tightened as I glanced at her. Whatever she wanted to say, it clearly wasn't going to be easy for either of us. "I owe you an explanation," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "About Liam, and about why things got so bad between us." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Liam isn't just someone I met online. He works at the cafe near my office, the one I go to sometimes during lunch breaks. We started talking casually, and at first, it really was innocent. He was friendly, attentive, qualities I hadn't felt from you in a long time." Her eyes flickered toward me briefly, then darted away again. "But as we kept talking, I realized how much I craved that attention. You've been so distant lately, buried in work or lost in your own thoughts. I felt like I was drowning, and he threw me a lifeline. It wasn't fair to you. I know that, but I couldn't help myself." Her confession stung, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. What shocked me was what came next. "He promised me things you never did," she continued, her voice growing quieter. "He listened when I talked about my fears, my frustrations. He told me I deserved better, that I shouldn't settle for feeling invisible anymore. And for a while, I believed him. For a while." I echoed, my voice sharp despite my attempt to stay composed. Elena nodded, tears welling in her eyes once more. "Things changed recently. Liam isn't who he said he was. He's manipulative, controlling, and once I let him in, I couldn't get him out. He started pressuring me to leave you, to choose him over our marriage. When I hesitated, he became angry, possessive." Her words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just infidelity. It was something darker, more dangerous. "What are you saying?" I demanded, leaning forward in my seat. "That he's threatening you?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes. He says if I don't leave you, he'll make sure everyone knows what happened between us. He'll ruin your reputation, expose private details about our lives." Her voice trailed off, choked by emotion. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt something other than anger, fear. Not for myself, but for her. Dr. Marlowe broke the silence, his tone gentle but firm. Elena, have you considered reporting this behavior to the authorities? Manipulation and coercion are serious matters that shouldn't be taken lightly. She shook her head vehemently. No, if I do that, he'll only escalate. I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of me. The room fell silent, heavy with unspoken tension. As much as I wanted to lash out, to demand justice for what she'd done, I couldn't ignore the danger she was in. And then, almost imperceptibly, a new thought began to form in my mind. A plan. The days following Elena's revelation about Liam were a blur of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt a surge of protectiveness toward her, a primal instinct to shield her from harm, even after everything that had happened. On the other hand, my anger still simmered beneath the surface, fueling thoughts I wasn't proud of. How could she have let this happen? Why hadn't she come to me sooner? But as much as I wanted answers, there was no time for self-pity or recrimination. Liam's threats loomed large, casting a shadow over every decision we made. Elena refused to involve the police, convinced it would only make things worse. He'll retaliate, she insisted, her voice trembling with fear. I know him. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Her words haunted me. If she was right, and I had no reason to doubt her, then confronting Liam directly was out of the question. But doing nothing wasn't an option either. That's when the idea began to take shape in my mind. It started innocently enough, a way to gather information without tipping him off. I created a fake social media profile under the guise of a new coworker named Daniel. The persona was carefully crafted, friendly but unassuming, someone who might strike up a casual conversation without raising suspicion. Within hours, I sent a connection request to Liam. To my relief, he accepted almost immediately. His profile picture showed a man in his early 30s with sharp features and an arrogant smirk, a face that instantly set my teeth on edge. Scrolling through his posts, I found countless photos of him at bars, parties, and upscale restaurants, always surrounded by admirers. It was clear he thrived on attention, feeding off the validation of others like a parasite. Our first exchange was brief but telling. Daniel, hey man, just joined the company last week. Heard you're the guy to know around here. Liam, haha, yeah, something like that. What department are you in? Daniel, marketing. Still getting settled, though. Figured I'd reach out since we seem to have some mutual connections. From there, the conversation flowed easily. Liam was eager to talk about himself, boasting about his accomplishments and dropping hints about his charming personality. It didn't take long for him to mention Elena, or rather, a certain someone he claimed had caught his eye. She's amazing, he wrote, his tone dripping with smug satisfaction. Smart, beautiful, everything a guy could want. Too bad her husband doesn't appreciate her the way I do. His arrogance made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. First, I needed proof. Something concrete that would expose him for who he really was. Over the next few days, I continued messaging Liam, subtly steering the conversation toward Elena whenever possible. Each interaction revealed more about his manipulative nature, the way he twisted situations to suit his narrative, the veiled threats hidden behind seemingly harmless comments. He doesn't deserve her, he wrote one evening. If she had any sense, she'd leave him already. But people can be stubborn, you know? Sometimes they need a little push. A little push. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. Was he planning something? Had he already acted on his threats? I shared my findings with Elena cautiously, unsure how she would react. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss them. Instead, her expression hardened, resolve replacing the fear that had lingered in her eyes for days. We need to stop him, she said firmly, before he hurts anyone else. For the first time since this nightmare began, we were in agreement. As the pieces fell into place, I realized this wasn't just about protecting Elena anymore. It was about justice. Liam had preyed on her vulnerability, using charm and manipulation to worm his way into her life. And now, he thought he could control her, dictate her choices, and destroy anyone who stood in his way. But he underestimated one thing: how far I was willing to go to protect the woman I loved, even if she no longer loved me back. With Elena's reluctant blessing, I devised a plan to expose Liam for the manipulative predator he truly was. It wasn't enough to simply gather evidence. We needed something undeniable, something that would leave no room for doubt or excuses. The idea came to me late one night as I stared at Liam's profile, scrolling through his endless stream of self-aggrandizing posts. He thrived on control, feeding off the admiration of others while hiding behind a facade of charm and confidence. What if we turned his own tactics against him? "Here's what we'll do," I said to Elena the next morning, my voice low but steady. "We'll set up a meeting between you and Liam, at a public place where he won't suspect anything unusual. Meanwhile, I'll be nearby, recording everything." Elena's eyes widened in alarm. "Are you sure about this? What if he figures it out?" "He won't," I assured her, though I couldn't completely mask the uncertainty in my tone. "He's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. We'll use that against him." After some hesitation, she agreed. Together, we crafted a message designed to lure him into our trap. "Elena, hey Liam, can we meet tonight? There's something important I need to tell you." His response came almost immediately. "Liam, of course. Where and when?" We chose a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, a location familiar enough to avoid suspicion but isolated enough to ensure privacy. When the time came, Elena arrived first, sitting nervously at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. I positioned myself at a nearby booth, hidden from view but close enough to hear every word. When Liam walked in, his demeanor was calm and collected, though I noticed the way his gaze swept the room before settling on Elena. She greeted him with a forced smile, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her teacup. "I wanted to talk about us," she began, her voice wavering, "about where things stand." Liam leaned back in his chair, his expression smug. "Finally ready to make a decision, huh? Took you long enough." "It's not that simple," Elena replied, her tone firmer now. "You've been pressuring me, threatening me. I can't keep living like this." For a moment, his mask slipped, revealing the ugliness beneath. "Oh, come on," he scoffed. "Don't act so innocent. You knew exactly what you were getting into when you started seeing me. Don't try to play the victim now." "That's rich coming from you," Elena shot back, her voice rising slightly. "You manipulated me, used my loneliness against me, and now you're trying to blackmail me into leaving my husband. Does that sound fair to you?" Liam's jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. But it was fleeting. Almost immediately, his composure returned, replaced by a cold, calculating smirk. "You should have thought about that before you led me on," he said smoothly. "But hey, if you want to end things, fine. Just remember, you brought this on yourself." As their argument escalated, I discreetly activated the recording app on my phone, capturing every word. By the time they parted ways, I had all the proof we needed. That night, as Elena and I sat together in silence, replaying the events in our minds, I felt a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. We had exposed Liam for who he truly was, but at what cost? Our marriage was still fractured, perhaps beyond repair. And yet, for the first time in weeks, there was clarity, a shared purpose that transcended our pain. "We did the right thing," Elena murmured finally, breaking the silence. I nodded, though I couldn't bring myself to look at her. "Yeah, we did." The next morning, armed with the recording, I contacted Dr. Marlowe, explaining the situation and asking for guidance on how to proceed. He listened intently, his expression grave. "This is serious," he said after a pause. "While exposing his behavior is crucial, involving law enforcement might be necessary to ensure both your safety and accountability." Reluctantly, I agreed. With Elena by my side, we filed a formal complaint against Liam, submitting the audio as evidence. The authorities acted swiftly, launching an investigation into his conduct. Within days, he was questioned, his web of deceit unraveling under scrutiny. Word of the scandal spread quickly, tarnishing his reputation and leaving him ostracized by those he once charmed. For a man who thrived on validation, it was a fate worse than imprisonment. Yet, despite the victory, I couldn't shake the lingering sense of loss. Elena and I remained distant, bound only by the shared trauma of what we'd endured. In the weeks that followed, Elena and I attended more counseling sessions, each one bringing us closer to understanding the cracks in our relationship and ourselves. Slowly, painfully, trust began to rebuild, piece by fragile piece. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, anger, and regret. But there were also glimpses of hope, small reminders of why we had fallen in love in the first place. Months later, as we stood side by side watching the sunset, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to move forward despite the scars. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "So am I," I replied, taking her hand in mine. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like home. Life didn't return to the way it was before, nor should it have. Instead, we built something stronger, rooted in honesty and resilience. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but we faced it together, determined to honor the love that had survived even the darkest storms. Sometimes, endings are just new beginnings in disguise.